You may be seated. You know, nearly all of our lives, we are receiving invitations of some sort. When we're young, we get invitations to our friends' birthday parties. I remember some of those when I was young. I remember it a long time back, but I can remember it. But I remember one birthday party, especially when I was about 4, maybe 5 years old. The Borden Milk Company had a very large processing plant there in Marshall at the time. And this would have been about 1958, 1959. But Borden's Milk Company had a small carousel it could pull behind the pickup truck. And it could plug into a 110 outlet in anybody's backyard. And it had 4 or 5 horses on this little carousel. And they would let people use that for kids' birthday parties and other type functions at no charge. All you had to do was schedule it, and Borden's would bring it out and deliver it and pick it up the next day. Well, I remember going to this birthday party where they had that Borden's Milk Carousel there, and oh, we had so much fun riding the horses in that carousel there at that birthday party. It was a big hit when they would bring that to a birthday party. And as we get older, we get invitations to all kinds of events. We get invited to weddings, and you ladies get invited to wedding showers and baby showers. It's in the bulletin. We announced a bridal shower this morning. We get invited to silver wedding anniversaries. We get invited to golden wedding anniversaries. In fact, if Norma behaves herself, 4 years from now, we'll be able to have a golden wedding anniversary. But she's going to have to behave herself for the next 4 years before that happens. But anyway, we get invited to all these kinds of things. We get graduation invitations, and usually a graduation invitation, that's not so much as an invitation to attend the graduation. It's just an invitation to send a card with some money or to bring some kind of a gift. That's what graduation invitations are for. We get invited to dinner parties. We get invited to luncheons. We get invited to retirement parties. All kinds of invitations. Once upon a time, it was actually a custom to invite people to come for an afternoon visit in your home. It was customary, especially among the socially refined, to actually have calling cards so they could present that to the maid or the butler at the door, and they could be announced that they had come to call. Well, as the story goes, there was a prominent socialite who liked to mingle with famous people in New York City. But this prominent socialite had a reputation for being, shall we say, overbearing and annoying all at the same time. And this woman desperately wanted to make acquaintance of and meet the famous playwright George Bernard Shaw in person. If you are familiar with Shaw's works, among the more than 60 plays that he wrote, some of the most famous are Pygmalion and St. Joan. But she wanted to be able to boast that she had met George Bernard Shaw. She also wanted to boast to her friends that he had come to visit her at her home. So she sent her chauffeur, or one of her other servants, to the home of Mr. Shaw with a message. And the message read, Mrs. Blank will be at home on Tuesday afternoon between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m. That was her way of inviting him to come and call, but make it look like it was his idea. Well, the famous playwright returned the message, and it said, Mr. George Bernard Shaw, likewise. Clearly, it was an invitation that he did not want to accept. Well, I want to talk about an invitation this morning. An invitation that is for every one of us. It's for the young, like myself, and it's for the old, like some of the rest of you. It's for the rich, and it's for the poor. you to listen to the invitation. And I want you to see if it calls your name. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart. And you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Those are the words of Jesus. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. That invitation is an invitation that's extended to two groups of people. It's an invitation that's extended to two types of individuals. First of all, Jesus extends that invitation to everyone that has labored. Now, when we think of labor, all of us think of work. But labor actually implies more than work. Work is actually a privilege, and work can actually be a source of joy. Because no one can really be genuinely happy who is not, in some sense of the word, a worker. The time of our greatest peril as individuals is a time of idleness. Work also is something that has the ability to heal hearts that are hurting. Because how many people have there been over the years who've forgotten in some measure some sore wound because they've had hard and diligent work? Labor actually implies an entirely different concept for us. Labor actually means and can mean work that's carried on at the price of weariness. Labor can imply work that's carried on at the price of pain. Work that's so heavy, work that's so hard, or so futile that it becomes nothing short of sheer agony. Labor is work that has degenerated into toil. The toil of a monotonous struggle that ends in slim achievement and sometimes even utter frustration. And maybe this morning, some of you are in that group. Maybe you've taken life seriously. And you've tried hard to be your best. And you've tried hard to do your best. But it often seems that your efforts have brought you little, or perhaps even nothing. As Solomon would say, it's all been vexation of spirit and vanity. And if you're carrying on with an effort that has in it a bit of agony, a bit of the agony of a bitter struggle, or even the agony of defeat, then your name is one of the names Jesus is calling in that passage. And the second group that Jesus invites are those that are burdened. If you come to God's house this morning with a heavy load, this invitation is for you. And let's understand something. That's the case, regardless of what that load might be today. Your burden may not be like the burden of the one sitting next to you. Your burden may not be like the one sitting across the aisle from you. Your burden may be completely, vastly different from the burden that I carry this morning. But the chances are that most, if not all of us here this morning, are conscious of carrying some kind of burden. Your burden may be a burden of anxiety. You may be tormented by fear. You may look to tomorrow and turn hot and cold with fright. Maybe you fear for yourself. Maybe you're afraid for someone that's dearer to you than your own life. Or perhaps you're struggling under a burden and a storm of disappointment. Maybe once upon a time you dreamed great dreams that have come to nothing. Or maybe death has slipped into your family circle. And maybe it's taken one so dear that life has seemed empty since they've gone from your presence. But whatever the cause of your sorrow, you've become acquainted with tears. And this morning you're here, bearing your burden of sorrow. And with our burdens this morning, Jesus says, "Come unto me." Let's be honest. Careless handling of that invitation has left it just a little bit tarnished in our minds. Familiarity with it has in some ways possibly even bred contempt. Because over the years we've heard those who would say, "Come to Jesus," and say it in such a way as to deter rather than encourage people to actually come to Jesus Christ. Friends, listen to me. We must not. We cannot allow the careless handling of this passage over the years rob us of the deep, enriching meaning of what Jesus offers to us. Because that invitation is something that's on the lips of Jesus Christ over and over and over. Jesus never could see a crowd of people without stretching out his hands unto them and saying, "Come to me." I can see Jesus as a mother would say and hold out her hands to a tired and fretful and frightened child and say to that child, "Come here to me, baby." I can hear Jesus saying that to me and to you, "Come to me, and I'll take care of you." When Jesus says, "Come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden," Jesus meant something by that. And he still means something by it. He means we can come. And we can come instantly. And we can come in the twinkling of an eye. It's an invitation from Jesus Christ to us to accept his lordship, to enlist in his service, to become his disciple. It's the invitation to make Jesus Christ the Lord and the Master of our lives. Notice what he says. He not only says, "Come unto me." To everyone who is weary, everyone who has labored, everyone who is conscious of being heavily laden, Jesus says, "Come unto me." And he says, "Take my yoke." Now when Jesus said that, the concept of a yoke was a very commonplace term. It's not something we're so familiar with in our day and time. A yoke was a wooden crossbar that would join two draft animals such as oxen or mules at the neck so they could pull a load together. I remember when my grandfather still used mules in logging. And that team of mules would be yoked together as they would pull logs from the woods up to where the truck was. And they would load those logs on the truck with a cross-haul chain going up the skid poles. I can remember going with him to feed those mules on Saturday. Because he'd have those mules in the pen wherever he was logging from, and we'd go feed the mules on Saturday. And we'd have to put out enough feed on Saturday for those mules to last till Monday morning, because didn't go feed the mules because you didn't go to the logwoods on the Lord's Day. But I remember that yoke on those mules. When Jesus says, "Come to me," it calls for a single act of decision on my part. And then he says, "Take my yoke." That calls for a dedicated life. A life of partnership. A life of teamwork with Jesus Christ. Jesus invites you and he invites me. And he invites all the toil-worn and burdened to accept the yoke that he himself bears. What is that yoke? What is that yoke of Jesus? It was the yoke and is the yoke of a complete surrender to the will of God. Because the life of Jesus was a dedicated life. Jesus lived every day and every hour of his life within the will of God. Because that's something that Jesus emphasizes over and over and over. Jesus said, "He that sent me is with me. The Father's not left me alone, because I do always the things that please him." That's in John 8, verse 29. Jesus said, "I came down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him that sent me." That's in John 6, verse 38. Jesus said, "My meat is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work." That's in John 4, verse 34. Jesus said, "I have glorified thee on the earth. I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do." That's in John 17 and verse 4. You and I are invited to come to Jesus and to take upon us the yoke that Jesus bears. And we've got to understand something else about this. Jesus Christ will not. Did you hear what I said? Jesus Christ will not force his yoke upon us. Whether we come to Jesus and accept his yoke is purely optional on our part. Jesus has too great a respect for personality to even try to force it on us. He couldn't if he would. And he wouldn't if he could. Understand this, please. Jesus Christ will never compel. Jesus Christ will never force any man or any woman to come to him. Nor will he compel them to bear his yoke. All Jesus will ever do is stretch out his arms, hold his hands open, and invite. Whether we accept or not, it's entirely up to us. We need to understand it's our privilege to accept or to reject the yoke of Jesus. But it's not our privilege to reject all yokes. The most that is offered to us is a choice of yokes. If we refuse the yoke of Jesus, we must, in the course of things, bear some yoke. Remember what Joshua said long ago in Joshua 24 and 15? Joshua said, "Choose you this day whom you will serve." By that statement, Joshua meant that we will serve somebody or something. If we will, we can choose the service of Jesus Christ. But if we refuse his yoke, there's another yoke. The yoke of self, the yoke of sin that will be forced upon us. Write this down. It's on the final exam. We will all bear some kind of yoke. is optional, whether we bear the yoke of Jesus or not. So the question naturally becomes, why would we want to bear the yoke of Jesus? And the answer Jesus gives is somewhat surprising because it's not what we would have expected. Jesus does not urge us to bear his yoke because it'll make our way to heaven, even though that is no doubt the case. And he doesn't encourage us to bear his yoke because it's going to lead to our greatest usefulness, even though that also is the case. Jesus says, my yoke is easy. As Moffat translates, I love Moffat's translation of it. Moffat says, my yoke is kindly, and my burden is light. My yoke is kindly. Jesus is speaking out of his own experience. Jesus has worn the yoke of a dedicated life. And Jesus commends that dedicated life to me, to you. Some of the last words that Jesus ever spoke were to his disciples about peace. And do you remember what he said? He said, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. And speaking out of his own experience, Jesus says, my yoke is easy. My yoke is kindly. You see, the yoke of Jesus is kindly because the yoke of Jesus brings us rest. And the rest Jesus speaks of, it's not the rest of idleness. And the rest he speaks of is not rest from the yoke. It's actually rest under the yoke. It's the rest that's born of right relations. It's the rest, the peace that comes from being right with God. It's the rest that comes from being right with ourselves. It's the rest that comes from being right with our fellow man. It's a rest. It's a peace that comes because our work is no longer the agony of toil. This yoke of Jesus is something that's born of a great motive. Sometimes the lightest, easiest, most simple task can be drudgery if we have no high reason to do it. And by the same token, the heaviest, hardest of tasks can sometimes become poetry if they're done from a great motive. Jesus found his yoke easy. You know why? Because he cared. Jesus had a burning passion for God. He had a burning passion for men. He had a burning passion for women. And therefore, for Jesus, it was a joy to serve. Remember the story of Jacob? Jacob served 7 children. And it was like a day that was said because of the love that he had for her. Love always delights to serve. The only time that love's heart breaks is when love can no longer serve. This yoke that Jesus offers to me and to you is a yoke that fits. You can ruin a team of oxen or a team of mules. You can ruin them with a yoke that doesn't fit. Because an ill-fitting yoke will chafe and wound their necks until pulling even the slightest load saw to it that the yoke for us is one that would fit perfectly. Let's be honest. Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's be honest before God. Some of us are suffering from some very sore wounds. Wounds of the conscience. Wounds of the heart. Why? Because we've been wearing a yoke that doesn't fit. There's no surer road to wretchedness than the yoke that does not fit. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden." What, Lord? "And I will give you rest." That is the invitation I'm sent to deliver this morning. I want you to keep this in mind. That's not my invitation. That's the invitation of the Lord I serve. And what I want you to do this morning, I want you to look past the messenger. Look past the messenger. Look past his humanity. Look past his weaknesses. Look past his mortality. Instead, by an eye of faith today, I want you to look into the face of the one who issued the invitation. The one who pledges himself to make good every promise of the invitation. Whether you realize it or not, Jesus is here, present among us at this very moment. And he holds out his hands, and to those who are burdened and those who have labored and those who are weary, Jesus says, "Come to me." And if you've never surrendered your life to Jesus, I beg you to do it this morning. I beg you to come to Jesus Christ in simple, trusting faith. Repenting of everything that's sin in your life, confessing his name, and being buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of past sins. And if you've done that, but you haven't lived your life within the will of God, Jesus says, "Please come back." Ask brothers and sisters to pray with you and for you. And start over living for Jesus. Just as he did 2,000 years ago. Jesus says right now, "Come to me." It's not my